People have a lot of questions about how this would work if it moves forward. Now, to break down these articles, what could unfold in the final weeks, even in the final days of the president's term, is constitutional law expert Paul Lisnek. Paul, as always, thanks for joining us. So let's start with just where we are right now. They are preparing to act swiftly, as we know, as early as Monday, a potential House vote on Wednesday. A couple questions here. Help us interpret exactly what this means, how it would work, and the plausibility of this action, given how much time there is left.
So with the impeachment procedure, by the way, this is on a fast track. So it doesn't need to go to Judiciary Committee. We don't need evidence presented there. We need none of that. All that's required is 1 hour of debate on the House floor, which actually means even faster than the timeline you put out there. This actually could be presented on Monday with a vote on Monday, probably Tuesday. By Wednesday, this could be in the Senate's hands. Now, it is true that the odds of it getting through the Senate, where the trial would be held to be finished in time before President Trump would leave office, that's really unlikely. But here's the thing. There's two pieces of this, of the trial portion of this. One is, should he be removed from office? 2/3 of the Senate would require to vote that way. Probably not going to happen. There's another piece of this, which is he could be prevented from ever holding public office again. And I actually think that's what Democrats are after. So the truth is, they can actually hold this trial in the new term when Chuck Schumer is running the Senate, hold the trial then, and at that point vote, if they choose to, with 2/3, to keep him from ever holding office again, and that would be a reflection of his stated goals for 2024. That would be the purpose of it.
So realistically moving forward, there is a chance they could get this done here before the end of the term.
Well, my prediction is he will be impeached before the end of the term. The impeachment vote is going to happen. But remember, there's an impeachment, but then there's the trial and removal. It's the trial and removal part that likely can't happen before the end of this term.
Paul, many are wondering what options does the president have at his disposal at this point? Anything that he could have up his sleeve to do in response to this?
Well, in response to impeachment, no, that's really out of his hands. The 25th Amendment discussion that people are having, it's being reported tonight as well that even Steve Mnuchin engaged in those discussions but isn't going for it. And Vice President Pence, who would have to sign on, has indicated through reports that he won't support it. So the odds of the 25th Amendment approach taking place seems unlikely at this point. The third thing could be for the president to resign. Now, the president has said he would never do that, but let's put a little piece of interesting news in this mix, which is there's no question this president wants, I believe, a pardon before he leaves office. He knows he's going to face lots of trouble for this and perhaps other things when he leaves office. So he's got pardon on the brain. We also know that if he pardons himself, that could be found by a court down the line to not be valid because you can't sit in judgment of your own case. So while there's no cases on it, it is likely that a court, Supreme Court, could find a president can't pardon himself. There's also some notation in that DOJ memo, the one that says you can't try a president, you can't indict a president when he's in office, also indicates that he may not be able to pardon himself. That would actually be the momentum behind stepping down a bit early, making Mike Pence president, and then having Pence, if he was willing to, issue the pardon. That kind of pardon, in my view, would be unquestionably authorized, because that is the president authorizing a pardon, in that case, President Mike Pence.
I mean, I think at this point, Paul, anything is on the table given the week that we've had. Certainly unprecedented, though. No president has ever pardoned himself, and the closest we've ever come is Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon. Some wonder if that either helped or hurt Gerald Ford moving forward. So I think many do wonder in these murky waters what President Trump would be capable of doing in terms of pardoning himself.